case. We set aside a couple of weeks to go cruising.
Okay.
And I was going to leave right after, I think on the 28th.
That's fine. We've been as transparent with you as we can be. There's nothing you can call in from Seaboard. Are we on?
You are.
Hey, greetings, and I call this meeting to order of the Belfast version of the R.S.U. 20 Withdrawal Committee. Can you lock the doors? No. Thank you. We're going to be done in an hour.
Great.
So tonight's meeting is without city attorney, without Bruce Melo, who is our unpaid but extremely valuable source as a former superintendent. Ben's here, and the committee's here. There's nobody else here, so this is our first meeting. So we finally we did it. Except for you, we wore them out. So tonight's meeting is brief. It's a recap, and it's a go around the horn and fill in with any details you've heard or feel that's worth sharing. And who wants to start?
Went to Swanville Selectmen's meeting last week. They are telling the pathway, get the notification to the state, and they're very receptive to that. It's very brief. Here's what you need to do. They said they know and said we're going to do it. They formed an impromptu committee because it can't be official yet.
But they have an impromptu committee?
But they haven't.
So they have the committee that's going to happen?
Yes, and they're talking, of course, among themselves and getting ready for...
Who's on the committee?
Alexis is going to be, Butch Richards is going to be the citizen.
That's good.
I think the first selectman is going to be, I forget his name, sorry, Brian, I think, is going to be, and I'm not sure the petition, they were still trying to work that out. So they're moving, and I explained to them succinctly that, our goal is to get a commitment.
Yep.
And they were nodding their heads, and
okay.
I also heard that, and again, this is second, third hand, that Morrow had voted to be with us as a committee.
I heard that too. 3-4, none against, 1 abstaining.
Yes. And that Searsmont is holding their meeting Wednesday.
Yep.
Inviting some of the other towns, hear where the other towns are and how they feel. So I think it's moving.
Yep, so Wednesday, Searsmont has invited the other communities that we've invited to rejoin SAD 34. They've decided to have a meeting with all of those folks there. And I'm not sure, Chuck Hamm is a chairperson, and I know Valerie's on it, and then the gentleman, I can't remember his last name.
Brian, first second.
He was here at the last meeting.
I think so. Probably is.
Yes, former principal, I think. So the other towns are meeting. Former mayor, hopefully a ghost. But the other towns are meeting, which is good. They all know clearly that we've set a date of September 4th because of the time frame to get a March 15th vote. So all of that's good news. Northport we haven't heard from, so I would encourage you to reach out to Northport to see where they stand. Next meeting, next Monday night, Kristen Collins is going to be here. I gave her, she asked me for specifically a copy of the RCP, which was the commitment it was the plan, if you will, when we put together the R.S.U. 20. And so she could have all the details of the coupling to then begin the decoupling process and see if there's any chinks in the armor, so to speak.
Okay. Oh, well. Last time we met, there were a lot of questions that we couldn't really answer. I certainly couldn't. Primarily around the question of money and what it's going to cost.
Yep.
So, knowing that we have a pretty hefty budget for consultants, I did a little checking around, and I called the state financial, Department of Education Finance Office, and they think that they could get a consultant, that they could suggest someone to be a consultant in the same way that Christine is the consultant, somebody objective, to make sure that we aren't forgetting something. And I hear things, they may be maybe they're not something to worry about or not, but I hear things about, for example, the debt service that Stockton Springs, or not Stockton, Searsport and Stockton Springs and the rest of the R.S.U. subsidized to some degree. I've heard that, I don't know if it's true, but these are the questions that I get from people that I talk to.
Can you explain what?
Well, what
do you mean?
we owe, I think, about I think it's $5 million that is owed on school structures in Belfast.
Yes, okay.
And
I think it's more, but okay.
and there's a question, and this is probably a legal question as much as anything else, but when the property would transfer to the new R.S.U., which would be we call 34, but it's, whatever it is, but that might need to be paid off. I heard that. I don't know if it's true.
Right, I heard that too.
Okay. There are other things. Another concern that's going to impact the small towns is the number of special ed children that are required to have a high, student-teacher ratio, such as 1-to-1.
Ed techs, yeah.
And so that would certainly make people want to be in a larger group than a smaller group.
Right.
Because it spreads the cost. It's like an insurance policy. If you're a small town, you have 3 autistic children, it would cut, and you were trying to educate them with your own tax base, it would be very expensive. Whereas if you shared it with a larger group, in a larger tax base, it would proportionally not affect you so badly. So these are questions but the most important questions, perhaps, are the questions that we're not thinking of. And I'm reminded, because I live near the Crosby School, and I know that nobody intended for that school to become abused. Somebody made a mistake. And somebody probably made a mistake when they did this whole created R.S.U's. That probably was a mistake. Most people would say it was. But in untying these two entities, there may be unintended consequences, financial consequences. And I'd like to be able to tell people when they ask just where things will lie. For the most part, I think that if we take the two, if we disentangle the two former SADs, probably things will go pretty much back to where they were. But I think we need to be very careful to be sure there isn't something we're not thinking of. This is an unusual situation, I think, when instead of the town owning the schools, you have another entity called the R.S.U. 20, which is artificially created from the top down instead of from the bottom up, which has been our tradition.
Well, it's very weird because, it's strikingly, it's irritating to me as a citizen of Belfast to be told that I don't own the buildings, I pay the taxes on them.
Right.
Kids go to school there, they're in my town, but I don't own them. And I understand that, but I don't need to, I understand that concept, but that's all it is. It's an umbrella, if you will, over which an entity,
Right.
a LLC, a not-for-profit, everything is set up like that. But in reality, negotiating with the R.S.U. is something that I'm going to talk about.
Yeah,
Because I think that's critical.
that's another, of course, that's another.
There's a lot of questions financially.
Right.
Bruce Malo has looked at the numbers. I've looked at the numbers. There's going to be instances, depending on who signs up to reform with us or rejoin with us,
Right.
will largely determine the spread outness, so to speak, of costs.
Right.
It would be beneficial to Belfast. We have larger debt service levels than, say, Belmont, which has none. But Belmont clearly, in my opinion, isn't even going to vote until November. So, in my opinion, they are not going to be part of this plan.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't even voted. I've heard from a lot of people who've contacted their town office who've not gotten a call back. So, and so, it is my opinion from what I'm seeing is that a town like Belmont with no buildings won't share any of the debt service.
Mm-hmm.
So Belfast alone versus Belfast with the other towns, I think you get a wash, if you will. Some of the former SAD 34 and 56, there are advantages to 34 side, there are things that we don't have to, that we have to pay for because we're part of the R.S.U. that we wouldn't if we were S.A.D. 34. Conversely, there are things on the 56 side that they have to pay for that they wouldn't have to if they weren't in the R.S.U.
Well, this is how I do my finances at home. I say there's money coming in, there's money going out, and pretty much it's a wash. But sometimes there are unexpected elements, and I think we need to do due diligence in our committee and be able to report to the voters as well as we can. And of course, we always have a caveat. We're amateurs, we're doing the best we can, we're human beings, we're dealing with a complex situation, but this is our best understanding. And fortunately, Susan, you can be terrifically helpful with this. I think it's people will feel better if the more certainty that we have, I think, and as much as possible lay these questions to rest with definite answers. And I know Bruce Melo is going to be wonderful in this process.
He will be, and Kristen Collins will be wonderful too, because she's a lawyer.
Right.
And although she's representing the city of Belfast, she has done business with the other towns as well. And she is going to make sure that T's are crossed and I's are dotted. And nobody's opinion here, I don't want to present anything that's unfactual. If there's a cost, savings, and an offsetting cost, I'd like both of those reported. But the end result is going to be to the taxpayers. Will you be expected to pay more, the same, or less, and why? And I think if we answer that clearly with our plan, with that explanation, and I think we'll have time with public hearings and roundabout talks, that people will feel, and it'll be the truth. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's a little trust that 4 people have, we can sit up here and make up numbers, but that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Here's the question I have for the 3 of you, and maybe Ben. Say we create a plan, which we have to submit by October 23rd. Say we negotiate with the R.S.U. the release of the buildings, or however you want to word it. And we get to October 23rd, and we're ready to submit our plan, and our plan it looks like it's going to cost us 20% to 25% more than it currently does today. What do we do as a committee? Do we say to ourselves, okay, we're going to try to sell that? Because I wouldn't. If the costs are going to be exorbitantly higher, right, we're going to need to make a side decision as a committee when we're looking at the numbers, which I believe will come out plus or minus 3. But if something's going to be like, to your point about special education, my answer to that would be, in the state, before the R.S.U. was formed, S.A.D. 34 and 56 both had high percentages of kids with special needs, as defined by the state, in a state that has a high percentage of kids with special needs. So it'll be a wash. That's my opinion. The numbers will bear this out. Yeah. But the question becomes, in my mind, what do we do if the plan is too bad for us to swallow, or too good to believe? Because really, those are going to be the 2 outside areas. Everything else is going to be workable. It's a plan, it makes sense, it's within our reasoning as 4 people invested in the community that it makes sense to talk to voters about. But I would warn us that if we do the numbers, and when we do the numbers, we need to look at it 2 ways. I think we need to look at it as a plan of S.A.D. 34 rejoining. I guess without Belmont at this point. Just, again, opinion. They haven't even voted as a town. So when you look at that, the other towns who have their meetings, when we come to September 4th, what if they say, we need more time? We need to start as a committee thinking about that. Because we don't have more time. So if September, and I'm a worst case scenario guy. It's always true, because then the news is always better than what you thought. But if all the towns said, you know what, we're interested, but we want to see the numbers still and all that, which we can share with them, but we still need to remain committed, in my view, to creating a plan by October 23rd. And if it's us and Moral that are committed, or us, Moral and Swanville, or us and... So whoever is committed, I feel we should do a plan for. But we need to pre-think, especially with Valerie here last week. There are people out there that just think, you know what, I like it, I don't care, spreads it out, bigger community. We need to pre-think our potential avenues again from September 4th to October 23rd. And the reason I say that is I attended a school board meeting on Tuesday night. I got there late. I wanted to give them an update. I saw Ryan's 5-year plan.
Right?
His vision, I don't know if you call it a vision, but a plan.
Right.
I heard the word commercial aid, drawing international students in. I heard, before I left and I had to leave by dark, I heard talk of things that have happened, I'm going to say in Millinocket, where they had international students come in for tuition. And I heard the words commercialness. I heard utilizing kids for money as one of the reasons that they were looking at things. And I don't know how people feel about that. I know how I feel. But it struck me as, and he referenced Herman a lot, and a person who he used to work for, and he talked about a bridge program for students to gain college credits through EMMC if these colleges that EMMC validated would take them, etc. But it was, and I couldn't stay for the rest. But the plan seemed about revenue generation somewhat.
It seemed like that.
Revenue generation, maybe even spending money to get money. The modular on the back of the Searsmont School, so they could increase the pre-K enrollment, because then you would have more students. I heard him speak of that. That's fine. That's his plan that I heard.
There were more components, but I want to go back to your skillful use of words. using children for commercial purposes. I mean, you could say that
Revenue generation.
There's no private school in the world that doesn't try to gain good students.
Right.
And Harvard University loves to educate people really well, so they will donate money. But we wouldn't accuse Harvard University of, using people commercially. I think that's a bit harsh.
Well, they used the word, not me.
Okay.
He actually used the word,
Right.
not me.
And
Just
I'm defending the superintendent here a little bit. I'll tell you what came. When he told the thing about using the temporary for 4-year-olds, he concluded, he said, but the real reason for doing that is that we want to start teaching children early. Now, later in the hallway, there was a woman who looked unnaturally jubilant and happy and joyful. And she was the mother of a 4-year-old who had been having to drive her children to Belfast and be put on the waiting list. And I mean, she was just so happy with this. So that made me feel, and it was a need that I would not have been able to appreciate if I hadn't met this woman. It always comes down to, real people that you talk to and how things affect them. But he also mentioned some good things too that I'm personally engaged with. One is tackling the K through 3 literacy. That is in my thinking, the most important thing to do, and we're going to be putting more effort into that. And I'm personally organizing volunteers, and we have a literacy coach who's going to coach volunteers to go one-on-one with children who, for whatever reason, probably because their parents are running around trying to make enough money to pay their taxes, don't have a chance to sit down with an adult and have that reading experience. So that's something we're doing. He also mentioned an apprenticeship program, and that's another thing that I'm very, very interested in. There are certain lessons that can be learned best, I believe, when you are working alongside an adult who knows what they're doing. And the reason that we can learn that way is we can watch an adult be confronted with a situation they've never seen before and see how they respond to it. And this cuts across the academic kids or the kids who are going into building trades. And that's something we need to start gradually and slowly with a few pilots, just finding the mentors to take these
Can we
kids
talk
on.
about putting librarians in the library though? Because that would be a great example of an apprentice.
It'd be wonderful. And
But
we could have,
You don't have any librarians in the libraries, especially at the elementary school level, because of budgets.
that's another place where our volunteers are going to be working,
Right.
because it doesn't take,
It's not only
to be a school classroom teacher is enormously difficult. I know I've tried, and it's very, very hard to do. But to work with one child, one-on-one, is something that every parent has learned to do. I know you've done that with your children.
But I think my point is a librarian could do that too. We don't have them. And I
I'm
think
all for librarians.
I know you are.
I used to work for the...
that's not a criticism of Brian or this board.
No.
That happened even while I was on the board.
Yeah.
And it always came down to cutting, money, cutting. And I mean, it did. And it's not only Belfast District. There's a lady I work with that was a librarian at Troy for a long time. But I think,
It's really hard.
looking for volunteers, when I use Caston as an example, it's a beautiful library for an elementary school, in my opinion. So, and they don't have a librarian. So,
Which,
Cass.
Cass, yeah.
So, I mean, it's just like, and I know people who volunteer to go over and read and things like that.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be wonderful if and when we create our plan, if we actually had librarians, for example?
I think you want to get back on the school board.
I don't know. I actually want to get through this to create the best plan for the voters of the city.
You're absolutely right.
But, to your point, that's good. So you were encouraged by his plan.
I think that this is, this is my intuition. You don't have to tell yourself a story about what you've been doing for the last 3 years and what you're going to do in the future and try to make sense of your life. My only experience on the school board has been a fairly turbulent time with a lot of problems. I had the feeling at the last board meeting that we are in a new phase with the school board.
This last meeting?
This last meeting, the school board applauded this plan. They're on board with the superintendent. And so, life is a question, but there's everyone that you ever would talk to would say, what we've created is a monster, the R.S.U. printing. But if the monster gets tamed a bit, we may be better off with this monster. Stroke it well, and because it's on the way to, I think, a new period of excellence that we can achieve. That's the story I've told myself this week.
Okay.
Next week it might be something different because we don't have all the facts.
Stroke the monster, tame the monster.
So, as a parent,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear both your feeling about the withdrawal and everything else.
I would say, strictly as a parent with children in the school system, I don't want to see my children going to school in Searsport. And that's a big issue for me. And I know that the school board says that's not necessarily what's going to happen. But just personally, I feel like I need to prepare myself for that possibility, given the underusage of the buildings, and just from a business standpoint, which the school district is a business. I mean, they are, they need to operate like a business. So I guess personally, I feel like that's inevitable. And maybe I'm wrong, but I feel it's inevitable. And that it might not affect my children this year or next year, but within 3 to 5 years, I will be faced with my girls going to middle school in Searsport. And I can either go along and say, okay, well, this is what I have to do, or I can seek alternatives for them. And my feeling is I would seek alternatives. I don't want to see that happen.
I can well appreciate.
And that's really my angle, is really that fear that I have. And it's not even fear, it's just reality. It seems reality to me that, it's going to happen at some point. And we can delay it because there's so much public negativity towards that concept. So I think the school board has said, we're not necessarily going that route. And you might not for a year or two, but I feel it's just inevitable. And that's a decision that all the parents are going to be faced with. And
there's another way to think about it. It just occurred to me as you were talking, and that is if your children should ever have to go to Searsport, they would not be going. It would be like all of Belfast and their entire class, all their friends and companions.
Right, and it's not really...
would be moving as a block. It wouldn't be quite like they would be the lonely little child in the school.
No, and that's not really my point. It's more like the sense of community within this area, the availability of the schools by riding your bicycle.
Sure.
These sorts of things. And not just my girls are 9, so I would see them probably needing to go to middle school in Searsport, but then my son is 13. How are we going to have a high school with the current population and then bring in all the students from Searsport? And is that a better education for him to be in an overcrowded classroom with modular units in the parking lot?
Well, Susan, I think there was that thinking. A lot of people had that same idea that you're presenting. And I would like to defend the process that the school board went through and that Bruce went through with the aim of increasing efficiency, and it had to be explored.
Right, but part of Bruce's plan was also to have a referendum, and the school board chose not to. And the reason the school board chose not to is that allows them to be able to do it. Whereas a clear referendum to even Valerie Mank and some of the people that support the R.S.U., it would have been slaughtered on a referendum.
Eric, I don't believe that to be true.
Right, and you're in the minority because 5 out of the 6 towns voted Dorothy, and 5 out of the 6 towns voted to withdraw. So you're clearly in the minority about that.
But wait a moment, we're talking about, I agree, people were really, really worried about this, and that the school board might take action independent of consulting the voters. But
then why didn't they consult the voters? Because that was part of the
I know why I didn't.
Okay, well, that's fine. But I mean,
because I didn't because that was the conclusion that was drawn.
Well, yeah.
But that's an interesting idea.
What other conclusion would you expect people that voted to withdraw?
But a school will never be shut down without the townspeople. There has to be a 2/3 vote to close a school with the people in that community.
No, what has to happen is the communities, it may take more time, communities may say no, but at some point in time, and then they have to assume if they vote no to not close their school, which means transferring the students. Transferring the students by state law is the definition of closing a school.
Right.
If they choose to keep that school open, then they will also have to pick up the cost of the school along with their normal representation. And after, I think it's 2 or 3 years, the R.S.U. could close it. I think there's another issue here, though. I think, and I haven't read the editorial in the newspaper, etc., the idea of we've spent 3 years trying to compromise 2 completely different systems. Why do we want to do it more? Versus, because it's going to be a compromise. I don't believe it's going to be, I don't think both parties, being the 2 SADs, are going to come away happy. There is no compromise that happens to. And so why do we want to continue doing that? And I think that's the big question in the community. Versus versus, and this is just developing, that's the fun part of feeling the way, it's the idea of creating not a state, boom, mandated, click together, but now a grassroots effect of creating your own school system that is citizen-sponsored, citizen-directed, that reflects as big a community that wants to get involved or as little. But that's incredibly exciting. And I think parents and I think citizens starting to realize that that's what this really means, versus having to spend more years trying to find a compromise. And I don't like compromises in education.
The compromise that I find interesting is the dichotomy between SAD 34's population and 56's. And without a doubt, a half-empty, pretty big campus, if you will, of Searsport, being at least middle school and high school, 50% or less occupied, is a disaster waiting to happen there. Your question, which I think you've sort of asked me before, which was, don't we owe it a little bit to Searsport? What do they stand to lose if we do this? You know, I think that's a wonderful question. Had they voted as we did, whether to withdraw or not, I might have more interest in pursuing that. But clearly, Searsport and Stockton Springs clearly did not choose to vote on the subject of withdrawal. It is my conclusion that it is very beneficial for Searsport and Stockton Springs for the R.S.U. to remain. It is my impression that, let me ask you this, because as I said, I wasn't able to attend the whole meeting, maybe an hour. Did they discuss anything about the R.S.U. and about the potential closings or anything about the withdrawals of any of the towns? Did any of the school board members bring that up or talk about anything that we're talking about tonight?
That was not on the agenda, and we are, because until something changes, you know, we're operating as if the R.S.U. 20 is going to endure.
Right, and that was my impression. And so, and I'll speak very quickly. My impression was the school board meeting that I attended, we don't exist. That was my impression. It's best that we don't exist. They have no interest in us succeeding, again. It is not within anything in the school board's lexicon that would support even admitting that this is happening. I would prudently be aware of it and prudently think that transparently talking about it openly as a school board would be a responsible thing to do. Myself, that's why I asked you the question. And I'm not surprised that nobody brought it up. I was going to give an update, and again, I missed the meeting because I went down and the signs changed.
Yeah.
So my impression was, I was just going to go down and give a quick update. The board that I saw was during the time I was there was not thinking about the R.S.U. 20 dissolving, and that's fine. But that's why we're here, not to defend the R.S.U. You can if you wish, that's fine. I'm not attacking it. But we're here to study best plan for withdrawal.
That's right.
And my views on it go back to SAD 34 was in good fiscal shape. I can't maintain that that would be the case today because of reduced funding or anything. I just know where we were. We were in a good spot.
Well, it was also a different economic times. We were getting better federal and state support. We have to take that into account.
That's what I just said.
Yeah, okay.
So where we were, I know. Where we are today, I know. The options the school board has to stimulate growth don't impress me as a feasible way to get cash flow positive quickly. And that's not a criticism.
No, absolutely.
So it's a 5-year plan.
Right.
So I think a lot of things can happen in the next 5 years, to Susan's point. And I would have clearly preferred a board, including Belfast members, who had voted for public referendums. Because I've sat in 5 of these meetings now, and I've had Steve Hopkins go, I'm sorry, if I can speak now.
No, please.
Steve Hopkins go, it wasn't our idea, it was the administrators. Bruce's ideas were followed to a certain extent, but part of his tour and plan was also to have a public referendum. Clearly, after going around to all the districts, there wasn't much support for his plan, for many reasons. Susan's being the most clearly defined by people that I've heard from, which is people who live in Belfast, like we do, didn't get excited about their kids in middle school being transferred over to Searsport. The school board, at the meeting, they didn't address any plans Tuesday night about these concerns, correct? Since they didn't talk about potential dissolving. So again, I would rather see a board come tell us what their plans are about that versus how they're going to grow and become whatever his plan is around, like literacy makes sense, totally agree with you. But they're still not addressing, or haven't addressed yet, the problems financially with the $2 million shortfall, and with the potential at any point for the school board to say, well, at this point, we have no other plans, or your superintendent saying, at this point, we have no other plans, except let's go ahead and put forth this plan and go with it. And again, it's not a criticism, but it is a reality that we have heard no other plans at this time, Dorothy. So at this point, with the board not giving us any plans about what to do about shortfalls, I believe this is an opportunity for us to deal with it. And the way that I view for us, based on the Belfast voters, is to create the best plan possible. Number crunching, separating, finding out who wants to look at it with us, and creating a plan that is realistic and very true, right? So we don't lie to anybody. Not that you guys aren't lying. I'm just saying we're going to show the plan as it is, and it might show an increase or decrease. But my concerns would be, I moved to the city of Belfast. They have a new school, Captain Albert's. And I remember my wife Courtney going, kids can go to school there. And, oh look, there's the middle school, and there's a YMCA. And it's all right here. And here's the high school, a little dated, but a high school with a new fine arts wing. It's like, all right, this is a town that my kids can go to school to. Mm-hmm. And now, the realistic or unrealistic fear, because there is no plan out there about what to do, is, and since we also say, well, there's no plan, what else could you do? We can only presume that at some point that will happen. I don't want that to happen. Many citizens in Belfast voted that I know don't want it to happen. So I'd clearly like to look at the numbers and see what the plan looks like with a reform of 34. On another subject, I think it's important that Belfast look at what Belfast would look like as a standalone.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I think that's important is the city council has asked me for that.
Right.
And some people have asked me for that. Susan had that idea originally at the meeting that maybe we should look at that. But determining on what the other towns say or do, by October 23rd, we will need to have negotiated with the R.S.U. potential release of the buildings. And we will also need to submit a plan to the state Department of Education. And it needs to be the best plan for the city of Belfast.
I absolutely agree.
Between September 4th and October 23rd, if you think this is turbulence, that's when it's all going to go down, because we're going to need to negotiate with a board whose president, at our very first meeting, after anointing me chairman, clearly stated to me, the city of Belfast does not own those buildings. Mm-hmm. And you will need to negotiate with us to get them back. And since then, I've heard reports that we've been told that legally we need to pay everything. So I think it's high time we get the lawyers involved. And next week is all about that. But I would, as we go through September 4th to October 23rd and create a plan, I think it's important determining on who's joining us or not, that we look at the best plan. And if those towns as well are saying, if the numbers add up, then we should look at it too and be very realistic. I certainly hope the other communities join us, make an easier submission of a plan.
And I would also say, we think the discussion of this reorganization of movement of students ended at maybe the last public hearing 2 years ago. Well, it didn't. I was involved with attending committee meetings right up to January and February of last year. And Jerry Reed, head of finance, et cetera, was saying, we got that cliff coming, that heavy tax burden that has hit the towns now. And we really should look at the plan. We really should. And I attended meetings with people, school board members from Stockton and Searsport saying, if we're really an R.S.U., that we should fill these students, these empty schools up with students, and the most logical students are Swanville and East Side. That was being talked about January of last year. And then when the budget came, et cetera, the long process, that didn't happen. But let's remember the conversation was right up to January of last year. And I think that conversation is still out there. I think it's a very real thing.
Well, I went to, and maybe you were there, maybe you were not, but this couldn't have been 2 months ago, before the validation vote. I went down to the school, to the music room, and spoke out in support of spending more money for the kids. And the board was contentious at that point about wanting to cut. I remember this. So I don't know what the board really is, I guess is I don't know what the board really is. But I do know that we can create a plan that's best for whoever determines to join us. It's not complicated, we'll make sure it's honest. And if it's out the window skyrocketed high, we'll tell everybody, hey. But it's not going to be.
Right, but I like your idea of having what we could call Plan B. We already in agreement that Plan A, reconstituting the old R.S.U. or SAB 34, and then Plan B, which would be Belfast alone plus question mark, but doing our doing it our own way.
And I think what's really interesting as we think out of the box, and that's what I've been doing a little bit, thinking out of the box in terms of this new school system and the idea of tuitioning students, right? You're going to accept tuition students. State legislature says, well, for an example, if you were normally going to accept tuition students, the rate is about $8,000 for secondary, high school, it's about $6,500 for elementary. But the state also passed a law that says, in this case of pulling out, et cetera, that law, which I forget the section number, 5205, whatever it was, is not going to apply. So the idea of accepting tuition students, and that may very well happen in towns that don't join us, et cetera, that's a whole different ballgame. Because if you accept, say 100 students, right, at $8,000, that's $800,000.
Right.
But we're not commercial about it.
Well, no, I'm just saying that that's the reality.
But I tell you what, we're not.
No.
But if the other towns decide not to join us, Dorothy, that doesn't make us commercial. We have the buildings. Our leverage is we have the middle school and the high school.
Right.
And the other towns do not.
And
now, clearly the Searsmont gentleman said, we will look, and this is a school that's currently K through 3? K through Ames, they split it between all of them.
Right.
I think it's K through 3.
K through 2, and then 3 through 5.
So, but they would say they would look at a K through 8 school for that building. That's fine, that's fine. But I think we could come up with a better plan for them if they worked with us. And then they would just tuition their kids in, the town would tuition their kids in. So,
and you look at it.
so we would make a lot of money, to your point. But again, we've gone out with open arms and said, join us. So there's a difference between actively pursuing commerciality
Yes,
and
very good, of course.
Well, this is the unknown in terms of cost. We do two separate plans, one combining the former R.S.U. 34 without Belmont, for example, and then Belfast alone. And we want to be able to give the taxpayers figures. But how do we know things like how many Belmont students might we get tuitioned in, or Sears, or whoever. We don't, or even Searsport, we don't, there's so many unknown pieces. You're saying, okay, some costs are gonna shift here, some are gonna shift here, so I think in our plan, when it's just Belfast, that's probably a component we need to factor in, just
An estimate.
an estimate.
You have to be
I think divided by two.
I learned, and then this is third or fourth hand, but when Hamden is just about to open up their new high school. And what I heard was, I'll take that for what it's worth, is they built for 100 students more, because when you have programs that other communities don't,
Right.
you're going to have parents who want to be part of that program. John Bax as a classic example. And I really only know our high school, Belfast Area High School, as a school system. We have programs that many people
Well,
don't.
let me speak to that. I know kids who go to Islesboro, and who will continue to go to Islesboro until they're done with 8th grade, and then their parents plan to have them attend Belfast High School. Because we have more advanced placement courses in our high school than any other school, I think, in the state. At least we used to.
And as a result of that,
And the results of that are
Well,
so it's a matter of parental choice too. But
And I think you'd be surprised what parents are willing to do for their kids.
absolutely.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, when it comes, I mean, even if they don't financially have the means, they find a way, if it means
So I think it's
education.
I just had a sort of a deep philosophical thought about our discussion, and I want to point out some unanimity in considering whether it's a good thing to withdraw or not withdraw. It really isn't our job, we're just coming up with a good plan. But what we're talking about is, for children, is not rocking the boat. That's really what we're talking about. Children who were planning to go to middle school in Belfast know that's where they're going to go. That's so
And their
important.
parents do too.
And I, defending a little bit the idea of staying the course, maybe it wasn't right, but all the architecture is in place.
Yes.
And trying to keep things on a steady course. That's the best thing to do for our children, because they're not little widgets that can be just transplanted here and there. And it's more than just numbers. It's also the culture of these different schools. And it takes a long time to build that up.
And years ago, when Troy Howard was first built, there was a lot of discontent about where that school might be located. And part of the selling point to the public was, the YMCA, and it's going to be across Route 1. Nobody liked, we need a pedestrian overpass. I mean, it's a perfect age for kids to be walking to school and they have to cross this busy street. But a big sell to the public, I believe at the time, was the Y and its location. So now we have an elementary school up there. They're not going to the Y after
I go to
school.
the Y and I see the kids who come from Troy Howard and they realize they just walk across the field.
And you just
And then they're in a wonderful after-school environment at an age,
Instead of
a
being
vulnerable age.
latchkey
Right,
children.
That's right.
And you know, so
City of Belfast contributes to that.
you hit the nail on the head with that's culture. That, all of it together, whether it's the government, the local government, the Y, the school, the proximity, that's all the defining culture. And you hit the nail on the head. That's part of the definition of Troy Howard, because it's also next to the Y.
Right, and the
this
middle
sort of
school
thing.
age is this really
Absolutely.
precarious age of old enough to be on your own, sort of, maybe, depending,
exactly.
but need oversight, need help in making good decisions, and that's only helping our town to have a place for kids to go.
I mean, this would be the Flatlanders view, right? And the from away crowd who determined to move here. So if I'm looking at real estate in town and have a young family, okay, my kids go to Troy Howard, or okay, when my kids reach middle school, I get to drive them or they're bused 6 miles to Searsport. I mean, that's not just culture, that's a reason I moved to a town, right? So, and please nobody take offense, and it's nothing about Searsport. This is nothing about Searsport except a half-empty school building and a plan that might fill that, or may not. And you can call it fear, or you can call it slow reality, but I have heard of no other plan. And the question that I've never had answered, which Bruce Mado laid out in his plan, was it was going to cost around $1 million to retrofit Troy Howard, upfront cost, into an elementary school for all the schools that they're going to close. And so, if that's part of the plan, it doesn't make any financial sense. Now, no offense, I'm not running the district, but it doesn't make any sense as part of the plan that you're going to have to outlay $1 million. Then I'm not sure how you're going to save more than $1 million in the consolidation. So,
And the conversation started with you, talking about unintended financial consequences.
Right.
And considering a consultant, maybe that might be a good idea for us to consider. And if R.S.U. 20 ever asked for the services of a consultant, I can't believe a consultant with no emotion would just come in and look at our district. They'd be like, well, you gotta get kids over in that school. You know?
I think they might say, why don't you put librarians in the library? I'm teasing. I know it's a financial hardship. But the reality is, I hear more complaints about that, right? I do. I hear more complaints. I mean, if you want to help kids' literacy, put a librarian in the library. Have more guidance counselors. Do things that, because I was on the board when they took away, even while they were financially solvent. And the reason we took away was cliff's going to come. Well, when the cliff came, the stuff that was taken away was not enough, right? And that's not a criticism, it's a reality. But there is no plan to solve that. This plan of restructuring at least gives us, and I go back to local control, things that probably nobody wants to hear, but again, a school district without Searsport and Stockton Springs makes sense to me. Because then that plan wouldn't happen. Because there's no way we can bus our kids to middle school at Searsport if we weren't part of the R.S.U.
And after 33 years in education, you would think I'm not so Pollyanna. I'm starting to wrap my head around the idea that we the citizens, are going to design a new school system. And it's going to have some components of SAD 34, those
and maybe 756.
And stuff. But it's going to be a new design. I mean, we're thinking out of the box.
Steal shamelessly too. Brian Carpenter, right? So Brian's 5-year plan. The idea is that if this were to happen, a new school board, new superintendent, I'd say, here's this guy's plan. And you know what? There's some valid things. Please look at that. You want to take your best ideas for your district. And if Brian's plan has solid ideas, which a new school board would grab onto, steal shamelessly. The point is, let's see what it costs. We'll find out from September 4th to October 23rd, because we'll know who's with us and who's against us, so to speak. I'll also say that, because another person on another committee voiced to me this worry about we have to pay all of the debt off. Let me just say this. Let's let our lawyers look at the reality of the RCP that was created. Bruce Mailer doesn't remember any of that being in there.
Right.
He was the superintendent at the time, and I was the chairman of the planning committee. I don't remember any of that in there, but the reality is sometimes tactics come into play, and that's fine. I'm still saying let's rise above tactics and just work on our plan. And there's a phrase that I hear sometimes that I wish I listened to more, and I wish I did, but I don't, which is avoid the swirl. And the noise, and the naysayers and the doubters. I'm less interested in people telling me why it won't succeed, and I'm very interested in getting to September 4th and creating a plan to see how good it can be. And then, all of these questions will be answered. In the meantime, I avoid the swirl. And if I hear the swirl, I'm going to ignore it because I don't want to respond negatively, right? And I'm not going to get into pitched combat over it. And that's out there, and that's okay too.
And we're one of 15 systems.
Ellsworthy's going through the same thing.
I think I see a parallel between what you're doing, which is I think the only way to stay sane on this whole subject, just forget the background noise, and I really think that's what Brian Carpenter is doing too.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Now, Brian, though, probably isn't thinking about negotiating with us, which I need to talk about, because between September 4th and the end of September, probably we will need to negotiate with the R.S.U. We need to negotiate before we submit our plan, because part of the plan shows that we've negotiated.
Right.
I'm going to speak to the city council tomorrow night. This is my opinion. You guys can tell me if I'm wrong. I think Kristen Collins should be on the negotiating committee because she's the lawyer representing us. I think if I can get Roger Lee and Mike Hurley on the negotiating committee representing the city of Belfast, that's good for the committee, whatever plan comes in place, and the city of Belfast. Roger's a lawyer. Mike is a passionate person who has an opinion about everything, but loves Belfast. I think one of you should be on the negotiation committee. I don't think it's you, Dorothy, because you're on the school board.
Right.
I think it should be, and Steve, I don't think it should be you. And the reason I think it should be you is because you're a teacher.
Yeah, good.
You don't have a contract.
Right, excellent.
So I think it should be Susan Woods. And the reason I think it should be Susan is I think she has good balance. And the reason I say that, Roger is factual and will do it, and Kristen and Mike, they're factual and passionate.
Susan's a parent.
Susan's a parent.
Yeah, I agree.
And so that's just my idea, guys. I don't personally want to be on it because I feel like, having been on SAD 34 board, and there are people on that board that I respect all of them for doing it, but there are people on that board that I really respect because I've worked with them a long time. And that would include Tony Bagley, Alexa, people like that. So I don't know who's on, Steve Hopkins. And it's enough work that I'm being involved with this, I feel, that and with Roger and Mike, I don't need to be there because I trust them. Now, if Roger or Mike won't do it, I think Nancy Hamilton would be a fine person as well. She's very financially conservative in terms of dollars and cents. And but I would think that both of those guys would do that for us. Our council meeting tomorrow night, I'm going to advocate that we select them because after September 4th, before the end of September, negotiations probably ought to be done. Now, I don't think it's going to be one negotiating meeting based on the brief conversations I've had. And I don't know, I don't play hardball or softball with negotiating. And I don't really view it as a negotiation. It's probably the reason I shouldn't be on the committee. But I need to have seasoned pros in there representing us. Are you comfortable with that?
I think that's a great
Okay,
idea. That's absolutely a great idea. That's just perfect. That would be, you feel...
Susan, the question is, how do you feel?
I'm fine with it.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
I would agree 100%.
It's not personal, but you're a teacher, and I think...
And what I like about your suggestion is it's also off, we've got two other people, council people involved. I think the more people involved,
and Kristen Collins
and Kristen.
is a lawyer representing us.
Right.
Those guys will represent us and the city of Belfast. And Susan will represent us. But I think there's safety in numbers. I don't think the four of us can negotiate it. We could, but I think we're going to have enough stress on us as a group of four already.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a very good idea to have a negotiating committee that includes the city council and Christine Collins. Now, the only other question I have is if we're able to, or if we need someone to look at the financial impact of withdrawing. We want someone to give us some numbers. Should I go forward? Unfortunately, I just was able to, I've been trying to contact the state all week, but I just got through to somebody today who thought she could.
The consultant?
Maybe that, if that happens.
Let's ask Kristen.
Tomorrow, I'll ask Kristen, okay.
I think we should ask Kristen.
That's a good idea.
And the reason I say that is, A, she's neutral in the sense that she's representing us, but she doesn't live in Belfast.
Right.
And she's a lawyer, so she will have had experience with that type of situation that I haven't had.
Right.
We hire consultants all the time in the city council, usually through grant money, and hire them. The rail trail, we did a and Roger and I interviewed 6 different groups, and then we suggested this one group, and then they do the consulting. But I'd say let's wait till Kristen and Bruce next week. And Bruce is an unpaid official. And the thing that makes your plan interesting is Bruce has skin in the game. Please don't quote me on that. But Bruce is former superintendent till July 1st. So he's going to have emotional thinking at some point. His whole plan, which apparently was not the board's support, but his plan, and he went around the schools, was the only viable plan that has been, the only plan that's been brought up in the last 2 or 3 years about what to do, right? That's including when I was on the board. But Bruce has a lot of skin in the game, so I think we should ask him too what he thinks about a consultant.
Right. But you get a consultant who does not have, like you say, skin in the game. Even the most objective person, who tries to be the most objective, is maybe somewhat influenced, or maybe people assume they're somewhat influenced by some interest that they may have. And the idea of a consultant is that in principle they're objective, and they really can give the facts without coloring things one way or the other.
Well, I think Kristen Collins will do that for us. That's not, and the reason I say that is that's been my impression so far. And she doesn't have children in the district. Bill Kelly does, or did, and so she's going to be representing our committee. I think she'll be neutral, very factual. She's a lawyer, very dry, and most lawyers are. Sorry, Kristen.
Well, that's good.
But I mean, she's very factual, right? And she's the one who keeps saying, guys, it actually said you actually need to support withdrawal and create the best plan. And she's been very factual about it. So we can ask her about that too. But I think from a consultant, we can ask her. And we'll ask Bruce, because they're part of the process too. But is everybody comfortable with me going and asking a couple of guys from the council to represent the negotiation committee?
Okay, excellent.
Ben, please don't put that in paper until I've asked him officially, but if you're going to city council tomorrow night. I think the community will appreciate the fact that we talk about things live on TV before. But I did slip Roger the debt service levels at the last meeting, and he'll look at them. And I explained to him, standalone, I gave them to Joe Slocum, their community property, and they represent the city of Belfast, because the council, at least 2 or 3 members of the council have said, let's look at a standalone plan, and nobody on the council said, let's not do that. So I think, going back and we'll wrap up, we have to look at September 4th to October 23rd as where it's all going to go down. I've been euphoric, I've been depressed, depending on the meeting. I'm just being honest, right? I've been euphoric, I've been depressed, I've been optimistic, I've been soured, but I think that I don't know how committees get together, but I think the 4 of us make up a very unique and very fair committee, and I really think we'll get to the bottom of that and get the best plan available, see what it is, and we'll do so shortly. I will rely on the statutes and the steps after September 4th. Probably within 2 weeks, we'll have the plan done. It'll take about a week to do.
I mean, I would say depending on this negotiation and...
Well, the negotiations are part of the plan, but we can go ahead and create the plan. The negotiations within the plan say that we've successfully negotiated. But us doing the work of numbers, separating us and whoever else or us, and creating a plan, debt service levels, legalities, we'll have that answered next week from Kristen. It's like we're getting closer and closer and nothing's happening, but a lot is happening. So I would counsel all of us to relax and keep in mind that keeping open communication, keeping our eye on the prize, so to speak, the prize being the best plan for, say, Belfast, will be done by October 23rd and submitted. If we get to October 23rd and we 4 as a group say, there's no way in hell any plan we can come up with works.
We still have to come up with a plan. We have to report what it is, don't we?
We certainly have to.
Right. Whatever the best.
Yeah. So, by October 23rd, all of that will be done. And then we'll wait on the Department of Education and the commissioners, and the timeline is mentioned. I certainly hope the communities do come forward and say, you know what? Because Belfast has a middle school, we know where it's at, has a high school, it worked before, it's worth looking at. I still feel the voters, no offense to the board or anything, I still feel the vote was to withdraw, and I still feel that in the towns that voted, whether it was 54-9 or 300 to 100 or 400 to 200, that people did support it.
You know, I'm recalling when the board did not support going to referendum. It had to do with the wording of the referendum. Some of us felt that to say in the wording of the referendum that this was for an educational benefit was not quite square, because the rationale for it was financial. And that was the genesis of it. It was to make the running of the schools more efficient.
Right.
And not to waste empty space. And you could, certainly if you have several classes with 7 in a class,
That's right.
you can combine and have one teacher and save salaries. That's the one place you can cut. And it was because it was not going to be presented to the voting public as a cost-saving measure, but it was to be presented as both cost-saving and educationally beneficial. And some of the people on the board did not see the educational benefit. The whole
They still don't.
thing was driven by a desire to not raise the taxes. I'm not saying that that was right or wrong, but that was historically, that's what it was. It wasn't as if the board really wanted to rearrange everybody's lives. There was never any enthusiasm for that. But it was because of the fear, especially in some of the outlying towns. And if you ever looked at the town reports that show all the people who haven't paid their taxes, it's kind of scary, because there are a lot of property owners who have trouble paying their taxes, as we know. And it was a concern for those people. That was
Dorothy, one of the things that always bothered me is this idea that it was Bruce's plan, because I think that's horrible. I think, yes, he made the plan, but he did it under the guidance of at that time, the chair. The chair, I went to at least 7 meetings, and the chair was always there, always defending the plan. At that time, the chairman of the board. And along with a couple other people.
You're right.
I mean, the Bruce's plan, and, well, I mean, he designed it, but you had the chairman of the school committee there defending it every time, based upon the idea of fixed income, small town.
Well,
No education, however, never was talked about the educational benefits.
but that was to be the wording. That was to be the wording in the referendum.
Yeah, and you know what, that's probably true, I'm sure it is true. But I would also say that the educational benefits of keeping your kids in Troy Howard is an educational benefit as well as
Absolutely.
as a cost saving benefit. I mean, that's me speaking as a resident of Belfast, is that I feel my kids would have better educational experience if they weren't being commuted twice a day, 6 miles each way.
Absolutely.
Just me.
Yeah.
So, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
it wasn't. And here we are today. Whoever's plan it was, I think it was Bruce's originally,
Yeah.
but I think it was Bruce's based on proactively looking at any. And the striking thing, again, to close the meeting, the striking thing to me is there's been no other plan for economic up to this point that has happened.
And if you look at the typical school year, the idea of you're going to have to deal with, this is what they tell us, maybe a $2 million shortfall, that stuff isn't addressed typically until January anyhow.
Right.
In reality, maybe it should be starting to be addressed.
Unless you're in Newport or Newburgh or whatever, where they had a $1.9 million tactical area. You know about that, Ben? The town of Newport is $1.9 million in the hole.
So one of those,
They're missing some money, and And
That's the,
their brand new superintendent came to the job on, not unlike Brian, July 1st, and was told, hey, all the towns passed the budget, and it's $1.9 million short, and so they're going to run out of money in November. So it's either Newport or Newburgh, I can't remember, but that's a big one.
Yeah.
So, to the credit of this board, and that didn't happen for Brian. And I wish Brian and this board nothing but success. And I would say that at least Brian has a plan, and it sounds like the board is excited about it. In the meantime, we still don't know the answer to our middle school kids going to Searsport or closing the other schools and moving all the elementary kids into the middle school. And we really don't know anything because we haven't had time, et cetera. But I'm sure down the line, we'll get answers to that too. Whether or not this succeeds, right, as a vote, whether or not our plan succeeds, I hope that whatever happens with an RSU 20 or 2 new RSUs, I would hope that that never happens. And I would hope that the teachers' contracts work themselves out. It's not me to say, I'm not involved, but I hope teachers' contracts work out, and that both school systems, if it comes down to two, prosper.
I think in addition to considering a Belfast standalone plan along with a former SAD configuration, it probably makes sense for us to consider, do we want to sort of slow down and give other towns a chance to make decisions? I mean, if we come to September 4th and they come back and just say, we haven't had enough time to consider options. We don't know what's best for our town. We're not ready to jump on board with you, but we don't know that we know the direction we want to go. Do we then want to just plow forward as Belfast alone or Belfast with Moral? Or do we want to slow down, give more time, and deviate from the timeline that we've put in place?
The timeline, according to even the current school board, it's important to have a vote early in the spring because they'll need to create their plan for the following year. And then you need to have a vote early enough so that, if successful, the new school board, new superintendent, what have you, is ready to go July 1st. So we sort of struck a balance to March 15th if you go back 5 weeks.
Right, and I think, I hope we can follow that timeline, but if we're at this point where the towns come back and say, we don't know.
They can always ask to join our new RSU for up to 18 months after the successfully new RSU has started.
Oh, up to 18 months after?
They have up to 18 months to ask to join. And that's a great question for Kristen. But I've been told that by multiple sources, Bruce Malo, among them.
That's a good fail-safe thing for these towns, isn't it?
Well, and it came through because of Belmont, right?
Yeah.
Because Belmont's not even going to vote supposedly until November. And so clearly they won't be a part of this plan. But my understanding was they have the ability, and I think...
Okay, so that might be reason for Belfast to move forward regardless.
Yeah, because the new board can always say, sure, you can join us. Why would they say no? I guess the first question is, why would you say no? We certainly wouldn't say no to Belmont. They have no buildings, and they would add to the spreading of tax cap. Anybody who asks to join us would be beneficial for the city of Belfast.
I'm certainly in favor of figuring this out and making a decision and moving forward and not dragging it on for a 2-year period. I don't want to do that.
Well, we can do that, but I think and you brought it up earlier, it negates, with time comes less urgency, with time comes stateness and inaction. And I don't think there's any reason, like I suspect we'll have 2 to 4 towns saying yeah. So by September 4th. We've given them ample time to determine whether or not they want to join us 5 weeks, 4 weeks. We've talked about it. So they're having meetings about it now. I think we plow ahead. And the reason I say that is it's a disservice to the current RSU if we don't, for budgeting. It's a disservice to the new RSU if successful, for timing.
and we have a voter mandate.
And we have a voter mandate to uphold. So yeah, I think we plow ahead. But reasonably speaking, knowing that, towns can come on later on. And I would see no reason why that wouldn't happen, unless they determine they want to stay in R.S.U. 20. Right?
You never know. Going back to the negotiation committee, I wonder if we should be thinking about, and maybe get a list, maybe, 1 through 20 or whatever, of the items that will need to be negotiated. I just remembered that, oh yes, the central office is it's an R.S.U. 20 building, and what's the disposition of that? Assume that would just be part of it, but there are the buses, and there are things that I haven't thought of yet. There's a food service director, for example. How is the administration? Are we going to have two superintendents? Are we going to have a separate superintendent?
Right.
And the administrative staff that's there. This is all in. When these big items come up, they come up in the context of not rocking boats. Because there is an administration that seems to function very, very well, and are we going to duplicate that? And, it's just, not that we know all the answers, but we should be thinking for next week's meeting of all the questions that need to be addressed, that's all. Because it will have to be negotiated. What are the negotiable items?
Right. Well, my understanding is it's the personal buildings. Anything with debt service would need to be negotiated. Buses, things like that would work themselves out in the statutes, as would teachers, administrators, and people numbers. Keeping in mind that former SAD 34 and 56 people now are R.S.U. 20 people. The decoupling of that too would be probably relatively easy, unless you're a high school teacher who lives in Belfast who's being asked to teach in Searsport this year, for example. But in reality, the number of teachers per student ratio would be something that's addressed in the statutes. So the questions are good. Bring all the questions that you want.
And it was only 3 years ago we went the other way.
Yeah, it was 3 years ago that we did the same thing the other way. I do think the question of the R.S.U. 20 superintendent's office is a pertinent one, though, since it sits on Belfast High School property, which is R.S.U. 20 property. But that would be a tricky one, right?
We saw Searsport keeping the superintendent's office.
Well, they have a building over there, so. But anyway, I think the questions are, 1 to 20 sounds good. Maybe 20 is a limit.
Well, make our job easier, make it 1 to 10. But it would be helpful to be able to know when we're making progress with the negotiations. It'd be helpful to know.
Well, we'll know within a month, because it's August 20th. So a month from now, the negotiations should have happened.
Maybe we should use the Peter principle, our work spans for the time allotted for it. We'll do the reverse, we'll just, a little bit of time.
One of the benefits of asking other people to be on the negotiator, except for Susan, is, it's up to them. They'll know the time frame. So the questions you have are good for the lawyer too, Kristen, because any questions that you have that she can research and get the answers to, that Bruce doesn't know already. Okay? Anything else? You're here next week? No, you're here.
I'll be here next week.
And then after that?
Then after that, I'll be gone.
Okay.
On the boat.
Yeah.
Jealous.
I'm sorry.
Susan, sorry.
I'll be on the class. I'll be on my boat.
Questions? All right. I move we adjourn this.
Right.
There you go. Thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.